Hello, World Civilizations 1. Welcome back to another exciting week of watching me awkwardly talk to a camera while no students are actually here. Now, as you can clearly see, we've finally gotten to one of the more interesting topics of the ancient world, the infamous Roman Empire. So, make sure you pay special attention to this one, especially if you plan on writing about the Roman Empire, which I already know quite a few of you seem to be wanting to do. So do keep that in mind. As always, we're going to look at some of the key terms you need to be aware of this time. We're going to start off talking about the Etruscans, a very important civilization and influencing the start of Rome. We'll look at the Punic Wars. We'll look at the Rex Publica. We'll look at someone named Octavian, later known as Augustus. And we're also finally going to look at the start of Christianity. Now, as always, I will also make sure you're aware of important upcoming dates for this week. Your third content quiz is coming up on October the 30th at 5 p.m., with your final essay bibliography also being due on October the 30th at 5 p.m. Now, as you're viewing this, keep in mind that since this is the week of Halloween, I am considering potentially changing that bibliography date. As of now, just assume that it's going to be on this date, but keep your eyes out for an email where I might change my mind. Now, just to make sure everyone is as aware of what's going on as possible, because I know some people are going to ask, your final essay bibliography information is located in the final essay prompt. It'll tell you what I'm looking for, what I expect, and where to turn it in. Now, I know this is still pretty early in the semester, and we didn't turn in our thesis statements that long ago. So I do want to stress that you are more than welcome to change still your final essay idea as we continue the semester. This is, again, just to make sure that you are already working, and in this case, starting to do your research, and so I can give you feedback on your ideas as we continue, and not just have to give you one final grade once we get to the actual assignment. Also, be aware that your midterm essay is coming up on November the 6th at 5 p.m. The prompt and rubric for this assignment are already located in Blackboard, so it should be pretty simple to find. Again, if you have any questions about this, please let me know as soon as possible. And hopefully some of my fellow 90s kids, maybe, for example, will appreciate this meme. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump right into it. What I'd like you to do first is I do just have one of the greatest movie scenes of all time from the movie Gladiator. There are several historical inaccuracies in this movie, as you might imagine, but this is a pretty epic scene, and it does do an overall good job of showing the scale of the Colosseum and a bit of what gladiator combat would have been like. So for that, it's actually a pretty good movie. But anyway, one thing I want you to do as we go throughout this is to look at something called the Deeds of the Divine Augustus. This is something that's going to come up on your content quiz, for example, and in various other assignments in the future. So I want to be sure you're prepared to discuss Augustus as you continue this class. What I want you to do, if you haven't already, please make sure you look over the Deeds of the Divine Augustus, which is one of your assigned readings for this week. Consider the following questions as you go throughout this reading. First, why does Augustus emphasize his military victories, particularly against his father's murderers? What did he do when he was offered a dictatorship? Why did he do this, do you think? What was his purpose? What kind of public works projects did he engage in? Why do you think he emphasized that? And finally, where does he claim his ultimate authority comes from, and why would he claim this? So again, essentially, the way I want you to sum this up is use this document to discover how exactly he's justifying his authority. Overall, what does he claim gives him the right to rule? And keep in mind how it's different from other strategies of ruling that we've seen before. Now, start off with, of course, we're going to look at the foundations of Roman power. Although before that, I almost forgot to mention, as you guys may have already noticed, I'm not dressed as professionally today as I usually try to be, which even then probably isn't the most professional, but this is even lower standards. As you all are aware, when you're viewing this should be the week of Halloween, so I decided to go with the spooky shirt instead. So you can see here, You'll Float 2, which some of my Stephen King fans will probably recognize, and then here's the infamous clown Pennywise himself. So again, hopefully you all have a great Halloween, and you'll forgive me for being a little less professional this week. I think it's hopefully understandable with all the craziness we all have to deal with in this online pandemic world. But anyway, a couple of important foundations of Roman power. First, there were important population movements from 450 to 250 BCE that made the start of Roman power possible. During this time period, several Celtic and Gaelic peoples began to migrate throughout Central Europe and eventually settle in northern Italy, as you can see here. Interestingly, in 390 BCE, some of these Gaelic tribes actually sacked Rome, which was just a city-state at the time, and devastated the Etruscan civilization which controlled them at the time. At this time, the Etruscan civilization was the dominant force in this part of Europe. Now, why might this invasion actually give an opportunity for Rome, do you think? Give me a moment to give a drink of water while you're having your awkward pause. But yes, although Rome was sacked, most importantly, the civilization, the Etruscans, which controlled them at the time, also were devastated. This was essentially what gave Rome the opportunity to be able to grow and develop on its own, and not just be one small city-state controlled by the Etruscans. The Etruscans themselves were also very influential in Roman culture and Roman behavior. This group were a migrant population which eventually centered around modern-day Tuscany in northern Italy. They seized Rome sometime around 650 BCE. During that time, the kings built Rome a sewer system and drained the marshes in the area for more farmland. So now you're going to have a healthier city, hopefully, and more access to food. Rome also would take the religious Etruscan practice of having men fight to the death. The Etruscans used this as a religious sacrifice. The Romans would obviously eventually use this for state entertainment. Contact with Greece was also crucial. The Etruscans eventually adopted the Greek alphabet and adopted Greek literature and religious philosophy, which, as you can see from this meme here, obviously gave the Romans something to copy when they were coming up with their own culture and their own religion. Sorry for that, I got distracted there for a second. Someone was trying to show me how cool they were with their car engine. But anyway, let's continue. The Roman military was also obviously very important in establishing Roman power as well. By about 340 BCE, Rome had become powerful enough that it had attracted a unified attack from some of the neighboring Latin city-states. Rome was able to defeat them because of their advanced military. Some of the advancements the military possessed. The army around this time began to exist year-round, which again we talked about with the Assyrians, for example, why that's so important. They had a strict training regimen. They emphasized the tradition of past warriors, so soldiers had something to live up to. And they would also deal out death for minor infractions, which of course would ensure extreme loyalty, because no one really wants to ever be put to the death. Interestingly, bit of a modern connection, the spring month where the Roman army would traditionally march out to fight these various campaigns against their neighbors would eventually be called March, because it was dedicated to the Roman war god Mars. So again, bit of an interesting tidbit. By 275, Rome had established itself as the dominant power in the Italian peninsula. And for the 50s BCE, Julius Caesar had become, of course, a great Roman commander. He went out to fight against the Gauls in modern-day Germany and portions of northern Europe. These campaigns were so successful that they reportedly resulted in about 1 million Gauls being killed and about 1 million being enslaved. So again, the Roman military became extremely powerful and extremely successful. Perhaps the greatest example of this is the Punic Wars Rome fought against Carthage. Carthage was a former Phoenician colony which became the dominant power in modern-day Tunisia or northern Africa. So, of course, really not all that far from Italy. The First Punic War happened from about 264 to 241 BCE and was the largest naval battle in the ancient world at that time, fighting over the island of Sicily. Rome, of course, was able to gain the victory, as you might expect, but perhaps more importantly, they built about 1,000 galleys or more during the course of the war, which allowed Rome to achieve some sort of naval supremacy. Which, by the way, is a great ancient example of something that's still true today. As devastating as wars are, obviously, they can often increase the economy and the industry of a country, which can actually be beneficial. For example, if any of you are familiar with the comedy Bo Burnham, where he does the whole war, good God, y'all, what is it good for? Increasing domestic manufacturing. Which hopefully isn't plagiarism, and hopefully you didn't hate my terrible voice, but that actually is true. Because of this war, Rome was spurred into enough production that their military became even more dominant, which would increase their influence once the war was over. The Second Punic War occurred between 218 and 201, and occurred when the Carthaginian general Hannibal, who you may have heard of, attacked Rome in retaliation for the losses of the First Punic War. This war contained one of the most strategically brilliant moves, according to ancient historians of ancient warfare, when Hannibal crossed the Alps in order to invade Rome directly, which, if you know anything about traveling through a high mountain range, is a very risky move. This was considered genius because he was able to bypass all of Rome's allies and their naval power and attack Rome directly. Also, it was considered a brilliant move because of his use of African war elephants, which we'll go into more detail about in a second. However, despite the brilliance of the Hannibal invasion, Carthage was defeated. They lost all their overseas colonies, most of their African colonies, and the size of their army and navy was limited, and they were forbidden to wage war by the victorious Romans. Now, just a bit of a connection as well. Does this remind you from anything else from history that you may have studied before? Awkward pause once again. I'll never get tired of them. Yes, this is very similar, as some of you might be aware, to how Germany was treated after World War I. They lost all their colonies and had their army severely limited as well. Like Germany, this sort of peace treaty isn't really going to lead to an end of conflict or an end of tensions. Rome and Carthage was, of course, very embittered over this loss, perhaps even more so than the First Punic War, which essentially ensured that conflict was likely to continue. The Third Punic War did, of course, happen by 149 and lasted until about 146 BCE. Ironically, though, this war was actually a result of Carthage launching an invasion to protect themselves. Because their army was so limited and they were forbidden from waging war, many of neighboring countries had taken this as an opportunity to raid and attack Carthage. Carthage launched an invasion in order to stop these raids. Rome used that as an excuse to invade Carthage. They eventually would lay siege to and destroy the Carthaginian capital, despite the Carthaginians surrendering their weapons. Most able-bodied men were killed, and the remaining women and children were sold into slavery. So, of course, as a result of this war, Rome had officially become the most dominant power by far in the entire Mediterranean region. Now, what I'd like to focus on for just a second, because it's a very interesting thing to look at, are Hannibal's war elephants. What I'd like you to do is go ahead and view this YouTube video where actually an ancient historian and a zookeeper talk about the effectiveness of these war elephants. Be prepared to discuss why they were such an effective tool in battle and what the Carthaginians did to make them even more effective, as well as what their major drawback was. But in the meantime, now that Rome is a bit more firmly established, let's look at Rome politically. Actually, some people aren't aware, before the Roman Empire was established, Rome was actually a republic. This was called the Rex Publica, or the public thing, which was the official Roman Republic system. This government was organized as follows. First, you have a Senate, much like our current republic today. There would be 300 to 600 permanent elite members, while all the citizen assemblies were able to form upon occasion to address some important issue affecting the less privileged of Roman society. The head of the government was considered to be the consuls, which were two elected officials who would serve year-long terms where they would command the army and command the Senate. The government also had tribunes, who were 10 elected officials, who were also elected annually, just like the consuls, who were supposed to protect the plebs or plebeians, which were the common people of Rome, from the rich and powerful in society. Finally, there was also a dicta who could be elected. Keep in mind, there was not always a dicta. They were only elected in times of crisis. But they were elected officials who would be able to hold dictator power, or essentially total control of the government, for about 6 months. So, looking over this really quickly, do you think that this republic is an effective system? Specifically, do you think it's a good way to have a balance of power between the rich and the poor in Roman society? As you might be able to see here, now that the awkward pause is over, on the surface it might look like an effective system, but there were seemingly a few flaws. Specifically, the balance of power between the rich and the poor was not that even. For example, in the Senate, the elite members of the Senate could serve on a permanent basis, while citizen assemblies were only able to form upon occasion. Also, the tribunes only served one-year terms as well, which meant it could be a bit difficult for them to get anything accomplished as well. Also, many people today would have issue with the term limits as well in general. For example, imagine if our president now only had one-year terms. That, of course, if you don't like Donald Trump, that might seem like a great thing to you, but let's look at it a little bit objectively, whatever your politics are. If a president only had a one-year term, they're probably not going to get much done. Many people have criticized the Roman Republic for having the exact same problem. Because of this, the Roman Republic would eventually fall apart and be reformed into the First Galactic Empire. I hope some of you at least watch Star Wars so you get that joke. But the start of the fragmentation of the Republic is seen to have started with the two tribune brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. They were active between about 133 and 121, where they attempted to pass some land reforms to give the plebeians access to land ownership. This, of course, is not going to be very popular with the elites, because many rich people often want to hoard the wealth and land for themselves. As a result of this, Tiberius was eventually assassinated, and Gaius committed suicide while trying to run away from a mob. So again, what does this suggest about the problems of the Republic system? I'll pause again. But yes, it suggests first that there's a bit of an unequal lack of equality between the rich and the poor in the Roman Republic system, and perhaps more importantly here, it specifically suggests that it's going to be very difficult to change things peacefully because the political opponents are going to react with violence. Because of this, in the wake of these assassinations and other various issues, from about the 90s to the 30s BCE, there were a series of civil wars between various generals trying to control the Republic after the public essentially lost faith in the political process. So again, think about this, especially maybe in light of current events. Is this kind of violence an appropriate response if the political process fails? Is this how we should deal with things now, for example? Yeah, if you guys are all here in person, this is where I figure out where the anarchists are, which would be very exciting. But yes, this shows that these sort of civil unrests and political issues are nothing new that we're experiencing today. And this would be probably, I think most of us could agree, the worst case scenario if America ever had to endure anything like this. So again, I'm not going to get into the political issues of today one way or the other necessarily, but this shows that the Roman Republic had to deal with the exact same thing, and it could also maybe show a potential outcome. Octavian was a politician who was able to eventually use this strife as an opportunity. I'll get it out in a second, I promise. He would eventually reunite the Roman Republic after he defeated the assassins of Julius Caesar and political rivals such as Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus, which you can see Mark Antony and Octavian pictured here. Now, my Shakespeare fans, why exactly was Julius Caesar assassinated? He romanticizes it a little bit, but historians still think he got the reason correct overall. Yeah, if you remember the famous line where Brutus and Cassius talk about how Julius Caesar kept pushing the crown away that was offered to him by the Senate, Julius Caesar, during these series of civil wars, had been declared a dicta in order to give him the authority to try to bring peace back to Rome with all these civil wars. Some senators were afraid that he would not give up this power, so he was assassinated. Again, Octavian used this as an opportunity to go after some of his political rivals in order to reunite the Roman Republic. Which, if you remember, and as you may have noticed in the Deeds of the Divine Augustus reading, Octavian was able to justify this because he was Julius Caesar's adopted son, essentially, at this point. One thing I want to focus on is his defeat of Mark Antony. After Caesar died, Mark Antony was given control of Egypt, had an affair with Cleopatra, and was condemned by the Roman Senate for leaving their children and her children his wealth and political power. Now, looking back again to how people have reacted to things like this in history, why would this upset the Roman Republic so much? Awkward pause once again. But yes, very good imaginary class, or class watching this in the future, actually, hopefully. If you think back to Alexander, many people don't like to see traditional Romans or Greeks or what have you give power and influence to quote-unquote outsiders. So just how like Greek loyalists got upset with Alexander for giving attention to the Persians, Mark Antony was lost favor with the Roman Republic because of his favor towards Cleopatra and some of his Egyptian subjects. This gave Octavian the opportunity to defeat him, and was also particularly inspired because Mark Antony was actually married to Octavian's sister at the time, which of course is just going to make the whole thing even worse. This led to the Pax Romana, which is known as the Roman Peace or the Roman Golden Age, which lasts from about 25 BCE to 235 CE. After this, Octavian took up the title Augustus to show his complete control over the Roman provinces, the armies, and the political process. However, he kept some of the traditional titles given to a consul, like Emperor, Princeps, which means first man, and Caesar. Think back to what you hopefully discovered looking over the deeds of the divine Augustus. Why would Augustus want to keep traditional titles like this to maybe emphasize his connection with the people? What's the point of that? Also, following the example of Augustus, all emperors after him would essentially walk a political tightrope, as it were. They would essentially try to appear as being semi-divine and insanely powerful, while also preserving the idea that they ruled with the consent of the people. Now, what would be the point of them walking this tightrope, do you think? Very good. Again, future class. I probably gave this one away. It's essentially a balancing act. On the one hand, you do want to emphasize the fact that you control the army and all of Rome to show off your power and scare people away from moving against you. However, preserving the idea that you rule with the consent of the people also makes people feel more acknowledged and participant in the political process. So instead of having people feel like, oh, this dictator is ruling over me and I have no choice about it, the idea is that Augustus and later emperors only are ruling with the consent of the people, so they're out there for your best interests and not just trying to control you. So again, bit of a balancing act. One way the emperor was able to uphold this balancing act is by, again, being commander-in-chief of the army. They would typically lead near constant campaigns against the frontier barbarians outside of the Roman Empire. Now, giving a bit of historical context to this, why is maybe having some sort of outside enemy like the barbarians to focus your people on politically useful? For example, how did Nazis use the Jews as sort of a barbarian scapegoat? Right, again, I probably gave that one away a little bit. It's essentially to have a scapegoat. One way you can get one useful political strategy for getting people to stay loyal to you is by constantly having some sort of barbarian or scapegoat to be in conflict against. So you can essentially blame all your problems on this outside enemy and get people united in opposing them, so that way they won't worry about potentially trying to overthrow you. Hitler and the Nazis, of course, did the exact same thing to the Jews when they rose to power, diverting all of Germany's energy into going after them to justify Nazi control of the country. Another thing I wanted to point out really quick is the imperial administration methods of the Romans. Unlike the Han, Rome did not have a very large governmental staff, and instead relied primarily on using local rulers and local politicians to control the various provinces. One thing I'd like you to think about for the upcoming content quiz is whether or not this would really be a better strategy than the Han strategy. But anyway, in the meantime, to start wrapping things up, we are, of course, going to look at Roman cities and their social life. Rome was, of course, the greatest city, arguably, of the ancient world, with 1 million plus inhabitants. However, there were a lot of problems in the area. There were very dense urban populations, of course, due to all these people, which led to ramshackle apartments and poor living conditions. There was poor sanitary conditions as well, and frequent diseases and plagues throughout the city. However, as you can see a little bit with some of these buildings, there was quite a bit of public entertainment. You would have theater performances, beast hunts, and gladiator combat all throughout the city. Another interesting to know about what social life was like, the Rome was essentially intended to have a sort of patron and client system. It was believed and popularized that all the way from the emperor down to local elites, the wealthy should act as financial supporters and patrons to the poor and help finance public works projects. Why would this be an important thing to include in your culture, do you think? All right. Once again, very good, future class. It's essentially, again, a way to inspire loyalty among the poorer classes in the elite and the rulers of your empire. If these wealthy individuals are encouraged to support the poor and engage in public works projects throughout the city from time to time, it will convince everyone that benefits are being spread more evenly than perhaps they actually are. Rome was also a very patriarchal society. The family system was called paterfamilias, or based around the father of the family. Roman men were essentially given almost complete control over their wives, children, and any slaves that they owned within their household. So again, very patriarchal society like many of the ones we've discussed so far. One thing I also want you to take a break to focus on is, again, gladiator combat. Like I mentioned, the Gladiator movie with Russell Crowe gets a lot historically wrong. That, of course, annoys me, and I'm not very fun to watch it with. But they do a pretty decent job of depicting gladiator combat. So what I want you to do is watch this YouTube video of one of the major battle scenes in the movie in the Colosseum, and think about some of these questions here. It's easy to miss, but pay attention to that speech at the beginning, and think about what historical conflict they're actually reenacting in this staged battle. So, what purpose do you think the gladiator combat serves the Roman Empire based on this video? Why specifically do they base many of their battle scenarios on Roman victories, and how is that going to help them keep control? And again, how does this scene remind us of the importance of a phalanx, which Romans also used with the influence of Greek culture? Anyway, to start wrapping things up a little bit, we are also going to talk, of course, about the Roman economy. Rome was mainly set up around a plantation agriculture system. Because of all the slaves they were able to capture during their conquests, Rome was one of the first societies to set up large-scale plantation agricultural production. So, if you remember, a chattel slave is, of course, a slave that is owned entirely by its owners and has essentially no political or social rights. So again, this is one of the first instances where this is being more widespread, whereas Alexander was only able to do it in a few places across his empire. Now, there were, of course, several pros and cons of this scenario. The pros, of course, would benefit the Roman economy. Cash products were highly produced across the empire. Wheat, olives, grapes, cows, and sheep were produced all across the empire. Huge amounts of metal were also produced as well. Copper, tin, silver, and gold was produced, which allowed for a universal coinage system. Quick reminder, why is a coinage system so beneficial for a large empire? Right, once again, very good. Class hopefully watching this in the future. It means that despite the huge amounts of territory and different ethnic groups Rome controls, it is essentially going to be much easier for them to buy and trade all across the empire because everyone's going to use the exact same currency. So there's no sorts of weird exchanges. Fun fact, the mining was actually so extensive in the Roman Empire that evidence of the air pollution it created can still be found in Greenland ice samples. So very widespread. However, as you might imagine, the slave conditions were pretty horrific and inspired a series of slave rebellions across the empire. For example, you had the Sicilian Revolt from 135 to 132 BCE and the Spartacus Uprising of about 17 BCE. Now, last thing we're going to look at when discussing the Roman Empire is the rise of Christianity. As I will talk about more in detail in a week or so, the Roman Empire is given a lot of credit for helping to spread Christianity across the world. Now, to give you a very brief background of what Christianity is. Christianity is a religion based upon the teachings of a Judaism sect leader, which essentially means at the time he was considered to lead a new sect of Judaism or Jewish teachings. Jesus of Nazareth, who is recorded to have lived from about 4 BCE, to either 30 or 33 CE. He was eventually found guilty of sedition and was sentenced to crucifixion. I think that's actually one interesting thing to focus on, by the way, because many people, even those maybe who've read portions of the Bible, aren't really familiar with why exactly Jesus was executed. Officially, it wasn't because the Jewish leaders like the Pharisees and the Sadducees were upset that he was claiming equality with God. If you're not aware, Rome actually controlled Israel at the time of Jesus' life. So the official reason for his execution would have been that he was supposedly encouraging a rebellion against Rome in Israel. So again, I just thought that was a bit interesting to focus on. Now, historians will also like to mention the fact that no historical records definitively exist from the time of Jesus' life. The four Gospels, which are considered to be the main accounts of his life, were all produced decades after his death. Now, that's not, of course, me attempting to discredit the origins of the Bible. It is believed by various biblical scholars and historians that these Gospels were still produced by some of the original 12 disciples of Jesus. But again, historians, of course, do love to debate the historical accuracy of Jesus' life due to this fact. Don't worry, I'm not going to take a side on that one way or the other, but it is something important to look at. One, of course, as some of you may know, one of the individuals who's given the most credit for the spread of Christianity is Saul, or later known as Paul of Tarsus. He was a Roman citizen who claimed to have seen the glory of Jesus revealed to him outside of Damascus. After this, from about 40 to 60 CE, he began preaching and sending letters that referred to Jesus as the Anointed One or as the Christ. Now, these are particularly considered to be important in Christian history because of these two terms right here that Paul emphasized about Jesus. So now, any of you who are religion buffs or religious history buffs, why would these titles be so important to the Jews in particular, and what did they seem to confirm about Jesus' identity? I'm going to take a break for a second. A lot of talking. But yes, again, very good religious buffs. The Christ, specific, and the Anointed One suggests that Jesus would not only have been sent by God, but was in fact the Son of God and equal with God. We'll talk a little bit more in the coming weeks about why that's such an important distinction. But for now, just consider that this was essentially one of the periods when it was more widely accepted among various Christians and religious groups that Jesus did in fact have equality with God and was God himself. Now, main thing we'll focus on before we wrap things up is the essential message of Christianity. This, of course, is overly simplified, but the main idea is that Jesus Christ had come to offer salvation to all people. One of the verses that best sums up the universal appeal of this message can be found in Galatians 3:28 in the Bible. It states, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." Now, why would this message appeal so much to people in the Roman world? Yes, once again, very good imaginary audience, hopefully watching this at home. It's essentially a very equality-based message, you could argue. Instead of being based on any sort of social hierarchy or political status, the idea is that Jesus offered salvation to everyone, whether you're a male, female, Jewish person, Greek person, Roman person, or even a slave. You can potentially be an equal member of Christianity. This, of course, would be widely appealing, as you might imagine, and is credited as being one of the major reasons Christianity was able to spread so rapidly across the Roman world. Now, last thing I'd like you to think about before we wrap things up is to just look a little bit about, or just to speculate a little bit about why Rome was so much more successful than previous civilizations, and particularly how it compared to the reign of Alexander the Great and his empire. But anyway, that's all I have for you this time. Just again, please keep your upcoming dates in mind. If you have any questions about any of these, please let me know as soon as possible, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.